We have a roll call.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Orozco.
President.
Mrs. Hernandez.
Present.
Mrs. Cameron.
Present.
Mr. Kroll, present.
And could we just make a note that Ms. Paez is not returned from the conference? She's still having fun.
No problem.
No, I'm not gonna. We take a lot of minutes for work session. Okay. Oh, good. All right. Let's send her pledges on this one. After all, I've been in, out of the country, so. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico, the republic of perfect friendship among united cultures. Okay. We have approval. Are there anything first? Are there any changes? No, not. Do we still need motion to do that in our work session? Approve the agenda.
Yeah, we still do that.
Okay, thank you. I'll make that motion. All right.
Awesome.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Have a roll call.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Orozco.
Yes.
Mrs. Hernandez.
Yes.
Mrs. Cameron.
Yes.
Mr. Kroll.
Thank you. All right, we have calendar discussion.
Right, wonderful.
Are
Well,
you in charge of this?
I am. Good afternoon and evening, whatever we want to call it, Madam President or Superintendent Chavez. This evening, we do have a school calendar work session. I think it is an important opportunity for us to sit here and go through all this. I have a little bit of a formal presentation on each of the board members. You have a packet in front of you. I tabbed them out. Also Superintendent Chavez, you have the same one. Just to go through, while we'll have this formal kind of rollout of that, it's really going to be a lot of conversation there at the end, given some of the legislative changes and most recent updates on the guidance from the Public Education Department. So what I'd like to do is just spend a little bit of time, just an intro, what our process was this year for looking at the calendar, the input that we sought, review our current calendar just for reference of what that currently looked like this year and why. An overview of the new statutes and how they impact us regarding instructional time. Then we're going to review the community survey. We did put a survey out specifically to look at two options, and I'm going to share that data with you this evening. And then we're going to workshop some proposed calendars. We have the two, and then we have some other information I'd like to share for our modified version that I'd like you guys all to consider. And then we're going to have a conversation about what you would like to see. Does that sound fair? All right, so let's go on. So this is what we did. Superintendent Chavez and I went through, we put together this plan to go through about how we can seek input for the calendar. We knew going into this legislative session that there were a lot of ideas that could really change the face of education for New Mexico. So what we did since November, we visited all Skype sites, got input from all of them. We had conversations with them based on what would you like to see differently, what worked well in the past, things of that nature. We had ongoing table talks, allowed for some back and forth conversation and a digital survey with information that they could send to us. And we had hundreds and hundreds of responses as we went to all sites. We also had a parent and family input, both virtual and person in December 7th and 8th for them to provide some input and some thoughts about what they saw as families and for us to consider as we were building this. We took that information and the idea was to compile 2 to 3 options for the school board to look at based on all that input. We came down to 2 based on the preliminary guidance that we knew was coming up from the Public Education Department. And then now we're at the forward work session, right? Let's look at what we have and then look to you at making some decisions about what you would like to see next and kind of the new guidance that we have that's a little bit different this year than others. So when we got the school site feedback, it really broke up into 2 areas, and we did this intentionally. One was the overarching calendar input themes. This is just about calendar days and time. But we also were asking them was like, what would you like to see happen differently or change or improve or consistently do on instructional time? What do we do with our instructional time? So for the overarching themes, a lot of people said, well, can we start in August? If not so much in July. So that was a big piece. They also wanted to explore the possible option for the 2-week fall break, 2-week spring break. what a lot of districts are saying, it's a balanced calendar, and it's actually more of a balanced break calendar. Balanced calendar would have you actually go to 3-week intervals and a really, really short summer. So we looked at that, and that was one of the options. They wanted sufficient in-service time for planning and collaboration, so that was a priority. And they also wanted to see, let's try to observe as many federal holidays as we can. There's a lot of families that operate on those federal calendars, so they wanted us to try to integrate that, or at least keep it. On the instructional theme side, we won't spend a whole lot of time talking about this today, but once we decide on the calendar, we will layer in a lot of these instructional requests that they want. So they want opportunities for district-wide events that support activities, project-based learning, summer camps, targeted intervention. They want consistent understanding about what that looks like, sounds like across all school sites. And they'd like to see it on the calendar so the whole community can know and be prepared. They'd also like to have some clarity on in-service days, what's days dedicated just for teachers for them to plan in their classroom, and what is district and or school site. And they want, a lot of them were coming up, it's like, we want more instruction time, we want to figure out how to provide more engaging lessons. And so we have some ideas that once we decide on the calendar, but let's focus on the overarching theme of calendar time. That basically is what we're here for. In your packet, you have our current calendar. It's the first tab at the top. As you go through, just for reference, it is built on old statute that had 990 hours for elementary, secondary at 1080. We also built in ELT time, K-12 plus time into that calendar as well. It did build in, because we had funds for ELT, we were awarded those funds, and our superintendent really lobbied for K-12 plus that could be sufficient. We were able to provide contracts at basically a 200-day contract. I just want to point out something, and you'll understand why. What it really resulted is 173 direct instruction days. Those are kids in school. This old model allowed us to count parent conference days as direct instruction. Right? It changed a little bit. So that's why I have it broken out as we also had 10 ELT days and 2 parent conference days, and then we had 15 in-service days for 200-day contracts. So just as a little point of reference, I wanted to review our current year. Now it gets into the fun. So we had a long legislative session. There were a lot of different pieces that had, and what was going to change. We knew on the books that they were talking about changing the statutory minimum and looking at some of the creative work that we actually started last year with, using a combination of hours and days to hit this mark of increased instructional time. They did mandate now for K-12, 1,140 instructional hours to be met by all schools. Out of that, it also defines instructional time. And it really defines it by making sure that students are in a setting in which they're receiving standards-based instruction and things aligned to that. And I did get some clarification, because it did pose the question to me that in the past, it was pretty vague about what they considered instructional time, most specifically to secondary schools. Secondary schools have passing periods. So we asked and we asked and we asked, and I finally got the guidance yesterday that yes, we can include passing periods as that. There are some caveats of it because it works out all in the math, but we can include that, so we're good at the secondary level. It does allow also, of that 1140, we can take 60 hours of that for professional work time, and then at the elementary level, and 30 hours at the secondary. They also define professional work time. With that, they put in parent conference days. So it used to be instruction, now they moved that over to professional work time. For us, it adds up to about 8 extra days. So out of that 1140, we can have about 8 days that can count towards this professional work time. And at the secondary, it's about 4 days. And in a little bit, you'll see how that all works out. Any school that operates over 180 days would be designated a K-12 plus school. I've not heard of anybody not being a K-12 plus school now. I think the way the math works, it forces everybody to at least have 180 direct instruction student days. And so that was a new piece that has come out. And in fact, the final guidance came out, I think, Monday night, with the tool coming out in several revisions over Tuesday. So we've been using this tool to try to figure out how this all works out. So this is kind of hot off the press for you guys. Now, one of the nice thing behind it is it offers extra funding depending on the number of days that you have. So they do these multipliers that they receive, because if we're gonna have teachers work longer, have more days, we have to pay them. So they recognize that. So, the first multiplier, what they call tier one, is, 181 to 190 days. It's a 0.012 times your membership, times the number of days that you have. So we're 6 or 8 days in that range, times the unit value. And that's where we're currently sitting. If you go to a tier two, it's 191 to 200 days and you get even more money if you decide to really, really extend your calendar. But we'll go on to that. The other thing is November 7th, House Bill 4 made that an election day, made that a holiday for Luna County, pretty much the entire state, but it doesn't take effect until January 2024. So we have a buy year, so to speak, that we do not have to implement it. I put it in ours as an option for option A and B, and we'll talk about it, but in my modified, I'm removing it, and you'll see why in a little while. And then we do have a new pre-K requirement that is funded now through a different source and is being oversaw, that went from 900 hours of pre-K to meet the grant requirements to 1,080 hours. So given this, it will more than not likely imitate our calendar with 1,080 hours required. We're gonna try to workshop that based on what the final decision on our calendar is, and we can layer that on. Because one of the feedback pieces from our families is, can we have consistency? So our pre-K kids are in school at the same time as much as possible. And so there's not a break in that, because it was very confusing. Okay, any questions on this piece before we go to the next one?
Well, maybe this is a dumb question, but do recess count in elementary as instructional? Is it?
Not lunch recess. There is a bill that went through that mandates 15 minutes of recess for kids playtime at the lower grades. Because there was a lot of schools were not doing the recess.
15 minutes?
Or 15 minutes, I believe, in the morning and probably 15 in the afternoon. But that can count.
Short.
Yeah, it can count as instructional time. So you can give 30, it depends on that. We'll be working with schools on building their master calendar schedules. To look at that to ensure that we stick to that piece. That's a good question.
And they're top kindergarten, first grade.
Yeah, I think the adults need to break more.
Get them out in.
Whenever that
We
we
get more attention than we had.
Okay,
To read.
so what does that mean for Denton Public Schools? And that's ultimately why we're here. For us, it means that for grades K through 5, to keep within the calendar constraints that the community wanted, we have to add about 15 minutes to our day, right, for elementary. Because we can count passing periods at the upper grades, we don't have to mess with their time. Before, when we didn't have clear guidance, we thought that we were gonna have to shorten their passing period, extend their days. There were a lot of different options, but for elementary, if we do like what we had done last year, right? We add a little bit of time to every day and then add a few days to the calendar. We keep from having to add 25, 27 extra days to our whole school calendar. And so we were able to use that methodology this time. So if you look at that, it'll be about 6.08, 6 hours, 5 minutes. Secondary, 6 hours, 45 minutes of direct instruction time, not contract time, just direct instruction time for students. And that lets us hit the mark for what we need. So we came up with these two calendars, and you have them in there as well, calendar option A and calendar option B. Both of them are almost exactly the same, except the beginning and end period. And the fact that calendar option B, if we let families vote, allowed for a fall break that was 2 weeks long and a spring break that was 2 weeks long. Right? There was a lot of people that said, can we explore that? Can we see how the community wants to do that? And that's riding on a lot of other communities exploring that, including Las Cruces. I believe TRC tried to do something very similar, or had done before in the past. So we wanted to explore that and put it in an option. So we built those two calendar options. Both of them, as presented for voting, had 178 of direct instruction days, 2 parent conference days, and 12 in-service days. Okay. And I'll talk about the modified piece as a proposal for you guys to consider as we go through. Any question on these two calendars? And how they link?
The only comment I had from the public, which it may not be appropriate right now, as I had several teachers talk about the long break, how it impacts, you know, the learning.
Mhm.
So they break and then have 2 months or however it is. It's not quite 2 months, but
Mhm.
that's a concern that some of the teachers have given back to me.
And we saw that reflected in it as well. We also had some of our families say that, you know, while the 2 weeks works well in the winter break, it's really hard to have like any length of time to get kids back. So if we were to take 2 weeks off, like in the fall, the spring, they were concerned. They didn't really have any specific evidence, like hard to get your kids rolling again after 2 weeks. And so they had brought that up as parents as well. And then some were saying, yes, it's too much time off in the summer, and others saying it's having more time with families. But on that point, I know our superintendent has been asking, and we've been asking very intently and nicely about opportunities for summer camps and other things that we may be able to apply for. Superintendent Chavez, I don't know if you received any feedback or answers on that yet?
No, we actually do the PED meeting tomorrow to explore that more deeply about what that would look like. But that's the idea, is that we could offer possibly, when you look at either option, it doesn't matter. But you look at the month of July, and we could designate like July 10th to July 21st as potential camp days, where staff could come up with either 5 or 10-day camps. And we would just request that it not be more of the same. It's not any particular curriculum as far as what they use during the school year, but it needs to be enrichment. It needs to be experiences. It needs to be, you know, theater camps and maybe readers theater if they want to practice reading literacy and creative writing and just different ways to mariachi, music camps, that sort of thing. Ways to have good structured activities that enrich their learning and enrich their excitement to be part of the school, so.
And no summer school.
Well, there would be summer school in the
Well,
June
you don't
as
have
a week.
School in one.
No, but it's credit recovery. I mean, it's secondary.
But elementary would have none. like
No
that.
K3 plus, no K5 plus, no.
I
They
think
would
that's what some of the
participate in
parents are
camps.
concerned about. They're used to. their
One of
kids.
the things, and I'm glad that you brought that up, that the new statute did, House Bill 130, it's sunset K5 plus and
Yes.
people. They don't exist anymore. There have been some concerns